If I may now, I am going to go over firstly to the spreadsheet and deal with the questions in the order they came in. And you'll forgive me, in order to cut down the time from last week, I'm going to only answer purchase related questions. I answered a lot of the rental related questions last week. So I'm just going to go through the spreadsheet. I don't know if you can see it or not, but I'm going to go through the spreadsheet and pick out any purchase questions. Right. So the first one is, how can we judge veracity of estate agents when shopping remotely? Well, you can do things such as look at their local websites, look up their IMOPI license. So we're talking about the listing agencies. Just getting a sense for the professional level of their website. Send them an inquiry, but buyer beware. Only send them an inquiry if you're not using a property finder. So if you're managing the process yourself, then do this. Send them a request and see how quickly they respond and the extent to which their response answers your question. If you're using a property finder, don't be in touch with them. The property finder will do this this job and will take on this task. And in particular, if you start being in contact with individual agents, you will automatically become registered, a point that many people don't understand. Local listing agents grab you on as a registrant, and they will refuse to work with other people because they will say that you are already in touch directly with them. So even if you can say, oh, I never gave you an authorization, they will literally block other people from working with them because they know they can earn the entire commission by virtue of the fact that they have your contact details. So beware. Methodology will be important in terms of your approach, but those are some hints as to how to vet people. Let me just see the next one. That's lease termination. Looking more for an investment property. So that's a broad a question. Portugal is not necessarily known as being high yielding investment market. Yields historically have been sub 5%. Those yields increased and improved after the crisis of 2008 and 2009, mainly because prices were dropping. So literally, the rental amounts were staying the same, prices were dropping. Therefore, the calculation is fairly simple division. And you can work out the yields. But after the increase in prices that we have experienced over the last 7 years or so, those yields have fallen again. So again, another area of our business, we do a lot of work for investors who like to build small portfolios of properties, typically, very reasonably priced, sub 250 to 350,000 investment properties where the driver is the yield. So reach out to companies like ours or others that are known for doing this. Your timing has to be flexible and you should be ready to act quickly because the great deals today are not what they were 5 years ago. I'd say this very openly. 5 years ago, there was, especially in hindsight, there was some phenomenal, fabulous deals. Today, that's not the case. You need to be aware of what's going on in the market, and as soon as an opportunity arises, you need to be able to act on it. So be sure that you have defined your budget, whether you're going to use debt or not, whether that investment is going to be linked to a residency such as an inland golden visa or whatever. Have all these things clear. Work with someone who can work through this with you before you even say, keep me on your mailing list of investment opportunities, okay? Preparation is key because you will be expected to act quite quickly. We aren't quite sure if we're buying anything yet and we'll rent for several years. Well, that means it's right. I'm under contract to purchase new construction condo in Lagos, but it won't be ready. Right, sorry, that's another rental one. Being unable to obtain a bank loan to buy property because of our age. Is there another alternative? The short answer is yes. There are two. So the question there was, I'm not able to obtain a mortgage because of my age. And this is quite common because in Portugal, 65 is a crucial age in terms of getting a mortgage. 75 and beyond is pretty much impossible. And the loan terms typically end at 80 anyway. So ideally, you'd want to apply for a mortgage if you were less than 65 and the term would run to no more than 80, general rule. Okay. two aspects here to get around this. Get around this as in find an alternative solution. One is if you are married, have a partner, and they are younger than you, put that in their name and act as a guarantor yourself. So use your revenue as a guarantee for the bank, and use your partner who is younger or your spouse to put the property in their name. And the second thing is use your children, especially, and this again, go and take advice, please, especially because in Portugal, as a resident, you have very interesting inheritance laws. IHT is 0 for immediate heirs, and therefore it may form an interesting part of succession planning if you do this. Okay, so do consider using someone who has an income and then doing a contract with them, what I would call a private contract with them, saying that you will support their payments. So you do this with your son or your daughter, your children, all together, whatever. One of them takes this on, you then warrant behind the scenes their repayment. That's one way of doing it, and we know several people who have done that. Right, that's a rental one, and a travel. That's traveling because of Brexit. That's a rental one. That's another COVID one, looking for one in rental. Right. Do you expect the market to settle down, less frantic and or lower priced properties in the Algarve after December when the golden visa ends? Well, I think I've given that answer, which is a no. I don't expect that to reduce. And how do we get the structure of building checked once we find a house we like? We have several experts in the market that do this. Always make 3 points about this particular thing. One is that there are sometimes people with a foreign surveying qualification, which is, and I'm not in any way questioning the expertise of these individuals. Their expertise will not disappear overnight simply because they've changed country. But what will change is that the underlying insurance that is associated with the surveying that they will do does not apply in Portugal, for example. So be aware of that. Locally, there are people who are associated, for example, with engineering bodies and the like, and regulated in that way. You will find people who will do more simple surveys and others who will do more complex and slightly more invasive surveys. They will actually check cavities in walls, and things like that. So it'll be up to you to decide which one to use. The cost of such surveys will vary anywhere between around 350 euros to around 1,000 euros. That's the range you can expect to pay for a survey it typically will be of a house. Most people will not bother surveying a building because there are too many common parts that are totally outside your control. So it's a bit of a waste of money. And even houses, very rarely do people do surveys. Young children. How long does a typical condo purchase take in months? Right. How long does a typical condo purchase take in months? So I'm not sure if the person intended to write condo because it was in a condominium with fees and because there was some sort of perceived added complexity to the condo. Other than condominium regulations and checking that there are no outstanding condo fees payable, the process is exactly the same between a condo and an apartment, and therefore no real difference in that regard. What does happen is that the time process of due diligence and then following up and completing, I would say realistically between 2 and 4 months, on the assumption that you're going firstly to promissory contract and then to the deed. And those timings will be affected by times such as New Year's and Christmas. Obviously, people won't be working, but generally 2 to 4 months is sufficient time. And again, if the intuit of this question was to say, I'm in a rental now, how far in advance should I be finding my villa, or my property, villa or apartment? Absolutely great question, because you should be looking around, you should be closing a deal around 4 months, ideally, before the end of your rental. It's not to say you can't do it in a month. That's been done. But realistically, you should be looking and closing around 3 to 4 months ahead of time, allowing allowing a few weeks of negotiation and closing out the promissory contract, and then allowing the lawyer to find the date for the deed and so on and so forth. So 2 to 4 months is a sensible time frame. Let's see, next question. That is another rental question with dogs. Cancellation policy, replay. I've talked about that. This is neither. Expat communities. How to choose area where English-speaking expat aligned with political views. I progressive and conservative. Now, I don't want to get myself into hot water here, so I'm going to avoid in part, purposefully, I normally don't avoid answers, but purposefully avoid the answer to say that possibly one of the reasons that you have chosen Portugal is because the nature of politics in Portugal is infinitely right of center and infinitely left of center. There is not the large-scale political divergence that exists in certain countries. And, for good or for bad, that's the way that it is. So bear that in mind, the person who asked the question, because that is a change, probably, bearing in mind your question, that is probably a change of mindset that through which you will have to go, because people here, are either disgruntled generally with state of life or just happy to sort of roll along. It is not a hugely emotive issue to the extent that it is in some other countries. Not to say that it's not important, or that there's in any way a diminution of democracy and people's placement of importance on democracy. Quite the contrary. But you will see, and I'll use the example of COVID. Portuguese people have just accepted the COVID rules in the main. They just follow the rules. They're not sort of out in the streets, major protesting and, whatever, fighting about individual freedom or whatever. They're just saying, well, those are the rules. In the main, they're following those. A couple of rebels individually are not doing that, but they have their own reasons for that. But it's a totally different mindset to many other countries where this might prove to be more of an issue. Then looking for a 1-4 villa in the Algarve that could be an excellent rental and home. So I'm assuming the person renting and buying. It's a very interesting point. The Algarve is not always well prepared to make the most of the views. I beg your pardon. It is often designed so that it makes the most of the views, but then it's not well prepared for living. And I use the example of the townhouse. So the townhouse in the Algarve typically is a great concept, which is a double story typically, plus a roof terrace type construction, which means that whatever is on the first floor maximizes the view. Could be the sea view, could be a country view, could be something else. But it means a lot of stairs generally. So as one ages, it's not the type of product that is ideal for people with aching knees, replacement hip, or anything else, or just simply, not wishing to do that much exercise, although exercise is good for you, of course. So the point is this, that you will often find it difficult to find certain types of product in the Algarve, because you mentioned the Algarve in the question. Excellent sea view product, believe it or not, is not that easy to find at affordable prices. And single floor properties, especially villas, come at a premium because there are so few of them. And one of the reasons is that the planning in Portugal is based on two factors, amongst others. One is the footprint on which you build a property, and then the build area. You have to meet both. So you can't build more than X square meters or X square feet. In case in Europe it's meters. And you can't impermeabilize, or you can't block so much or put cement on more than X square meters of land. And those two things often imply going up. So you have to build up, because if you're building a 3-bed villa and you can't build it out, you put the first bedroom, the master suite, and maybe something else on the first floor to make sure you get as much area in as you can. And this means a lot of the construction is over 2 floors. So again, this is where working with someone who understands where the single level product is, and I can almost guarantee that it will be slightly further away from the coast than other product, because why? You want to put more on the coast, squeeze more in, you go up, to get the sea views. So it's probably likely to be slightly further inland. I'm not talking hugely inland, but slightly further inland in a slightly more rural area will you get the single floor properties or single story properties. Renting long distance, right. So those are all the, now I'm going to, if I may, I'm going to the chat box and to the, see if I can bring that up and answer the questions here. Right. I thought it wasn't long enough, was the question to someone else. Obviously, we're trying to get a balance. What are those sites for rentals beside Idealista? If you email me, I will email you some hints of or some sites that Idealista, Imo Virtual, SAP, and so on. This has been extremely helpful. I was aware that Portugal does not have a pooled real estate listing service the US has in MLS, but had not thought about all the implications. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Another question. With a younger spouse, does having the older spouse as guarantor and using their income negate the need for life insurance attached to the mortgage? Good question. It depends on the bank, is the short answer. The bank actually... and that is one of the reasons why often you do not qualify for a mortgage, because you do not have the life insurance. I can give you examples both ways. So we know cases where it has negated the need for an insurance and other cases where it has not. The latest case, it did negate the need for a life insurance and was with a 77-year-old guarantor with the late 60s, early 70s main applicant. Or will banks accept USA retirement investments to back the mortgage? No. Banks in Portugal like income. They don't like investment income because they don't consider it stable enough. So the kind of things that you would typically be able to use, I'm not saying, again, I'm not a bank. And so I don't make the rules, and banks can be different. But as a general rule, what banks like to see are people who are earning well. So the number one candidate for banks are people who are earning well, in a high-paid job with a salary. I know it sounds counterproductive, and I don't believe this, but maybe that explains to some degree why sometimes the banking system gets itself into trouble. But a salary these days is not a guarantee of a job. Okay, the world is sufficiently volatile that we know that that's not the case. But that's what banks like. That's what their risk department sees as the lowest risk. For older applicants, pensions, and obviously the bigger the better, are the equivalent of the salary, shall we say, or the income if you work for yourself. Providing accounts with income every year. So those are the things that banks will consider as being the most reliable form of income, and on which they will base your repayment criteria. Then, how does one find out the utility cost for a property, water, electricity, etc., i.e. the normal recurrent costs related to the property, and also finding out about quality of water from boreholes if present? Also, does the state have incentives related to investing in solar for a property? Right, so 3 questions. Utility costs for property, water, electricity, etc. The easiest way is actually to ask the previous seller to give you a list of the last year's worth of costs, or ask the agent, the listing agent, to get the last 2 or 3 bills from the seller. This is often electronic these days, and so it's quite easily gathered. But I can tell you already, as an example, a 2-bedroom property generally will run you anywhere between 10 and 25 euros of water a month, and this is a 2-bedroom property being utilized by a fair number of people, between 2 and 4, because that's what a 2-bedroom property will be aimed at generally. Electricity might run you 50 to 125 euros. I know it's a big range. And gas will run you, 10 to 20 euros. Internet will run 30 to 60, depending on the kind of package that you have and how many private channels you have and that. So you add that all together, and that will get sort of a range of minimum, maximum for a 2-bed. The things that go up in villas and houses are more to do with gardening, pools and maintenance and stuff like that. The actual consumption within the house, obviously the bigger the house, the bigger the consumption, but it doesn't vary that much as such. The quantity, quality of water from boreholes. Very good question, actually. Firstly, boreholes should be registered and legalized. Now, this is one of those buyer beware. Oh, I've had my borehole for ages and I'm not legalizing it. Fair enough, fair enough. But then don't count on that borehole being either quality water of sufficient volume or whatever. And in particular, we have a client at the moment, one of these situations that wasn't declared. The client said afterwards, it said, only borehole. We won't accept that. We want municipal water. So we've had to go back to the selling agent and say, this is a deal breaker. Can we get the utilities connected? The agent went back and said, yes, the municipality will. We're actually getting the lawyer of the buyer to talk to the municipality to make sure that that is actually feasible and doable. And the borehole is actually becomes an irrelevance. In other words, it's there. The new buyer will have to decide whether or not that will be legalized or close it up and not use it and use the municipal water. So very good question. There are bodies that test this, okay? But you should be able to get this information because there is a database. I can't remember off the top of my head what it is. There is a database that lists all the aquifers and the water resources of the country, and that is in the national database, which requires registration of those boreholes, because at the end of the day, you're using a public aquifer and public resource which runs below your property. And especially in areas like the south of Portugal, the Algarve, water is a very, very scarce and precious resource. And does the state have incentives relating to invest in solar for property? Yes, but they're no longer that good. So even for PV, for photovoltaic, you have to have a certain size, and the feed-in price into the network has fallen over the years. So probably your best time would have been about 10 years ago, where there was I think 50 to 75% payment by the government, and plus you could get a tax rebate, blah blah blah. These days there are some, but they're not great, is what I would say. You would do it literally to save on the electricity, because that's incentive enough. Electricity is generally fairly expensive in Portugal, so you would do that. And then, what are some of the issues, challenges, costs of expanding the footprint of an existing property, i.e. to add a room? What is considered temporary, a cabin on a property, or permanent in structure? Simple answer is you can't change a property and any external aspect of it without a planning requirement. You can start with a thing called a PIP, which is the Pedido de Informação Prévia. You can literally sketch out a diagram, take it to the planning department, and if they stamp it and say they see no problem with it, you consider that almost as a pre-approval of the ability to increase the footprint. But the easiest way to answer this sort of question is hire the services of an architect who will do two things. They will check whether the footprint of your property has been maximized, not only in terms of the caderneta predial, so the what is actually registered, but also in terms of the condominium, if it's a condominium property, and whether there have been precedents of anyone else managing to increase the size of their property within a loteamento, okay, within what we call like a condominium thing. So they will do all that sort of technical analysis, and then they will also act as the interface to go and talk to the municipality, the Câmara Municipal, who will be able to then validate whether you can get a bid on or not. Okay, and let's see, that's the Q&A, and let's see if there's anything else on the chat, I believe. Right, thank you for Thank you for insights, very helpful. What local banks do you recommend and best for online access? Right. If you want to write to me about that, when I say we work with, we don't work, we don't earn any money from these people, unfortunately, but we like people to be independent. So we make recommendations, I should restate that. We make referrals to different banks depending on the situation. So things such as where you are in the process, whether you will need to set up a bank account remotely, whether you will be here to actually set up that account, in situation in Portugal to present some of your documentation. Whether you are going to be resident in the future and need access to a branch. If you can explain that to us, then our referral may be different depending on your criteria. So rather than just plonking out a list of banks here, I would prefer you to write to us and tell us a little bit about the situation, and we're happy to contextualize the referral. In regards, what is the criteria in order to obtain a mortgage in Portugal? In regards to residency, how long do I need to have lived in Portugal to qualify? You do not need to live in Portugal to qualify for a mortgage, and there is very little discrimination, if any, between residents and non-residents as regards the approval of mortgages in Portugal. Okay? What banks are interested in is your ability to repay the mortgage. Okay? Money talks, literally. That's what the banks are interested in. You will have to do certain things to get a mortgage, such as get a fiscal number, because you will own a property, and everything that is related to paying tax in Portugal, because you will have to pay the stamp duty, the transfer tax, and the municipal tax every year. All that requires a fiscal number, but you will be able to get a mortgage if you qualify. Okay? Is it challenging to find empty land for prefabricated home? Is it challenging to find an empty land? No, there is plenty of empty land. I think the question here is a little bit more, it's not quite that one, and that is, can you put a prefabricated home on it and then have all the things associated with a prefabricated home, such as the sewage, the water, the electricity, and so on? That is a little bit more tricky. And the second thing that is tricky is some of the prefabricated homes have certain permanent features, such as they require you to put down a concrete slab, which is permanent, because it's normally when councils don't provide a license, for example, agricultural land, is because they want the rain to settle exactly where it falls. They do not want runoff, by making the land impermeable and changing the courses of water, and therefore nature and aquifers and the like. Therefore, anything, for example, in agricultural land, which would be your typical empty land as opposed to empty plot. An empty plot will typically be in a zoned for building area. Empty land indicates to me that you're going out into kind of a rural area where it's maybe agricultural or ecological or whatever, and there the situation will be a bit more complex. Right, I think I've beaten my record of last week of 2 hours with an hour 35 or an hour 40. So, small steps. But I hope that this has been useful for those who've managed to attend. Other than that, all that remains for me to say is I hope that you all remain safe. These are difficult times from a business perspective purely, and this is not intended as a business pitch, but there are many professionals in places like Portugal that are there to assist people who cannot travel and yet still want to progress their plans. And for those who celebrate this time of year, a Merry Christmas, and those who do not, happy holidays, and I'm sure we'll be in touch, and we hope to be in touch with at least some of you over the course of the next few weeks or month or so. Thank you very much, and stay safe. Bye-bye now.